Welcome to John Gets Games. This is my variety vlog for August 2016, and I'll be covering a whole bunch of games that I played for the first time this month, as well as a game I'm excited about, a bunch of questions, and more. So you can click ahead to the section that most interests you, or just stick around for the whole thing. So let's start with two general updates for the channel, the first being a very quick Patreon update. 10 new people added pledges to the Patreon for the channel, which is amazing. That's way more than I expected, and honestly, it's a lot more than I normally even think I'm going to get within a month. You can see everybody over there. Even more exciting is that 5 of these people were new producer level pledges, so I get to put their name at the end of every video I make. It's just been an incredibly strong month, as well as about 3 or 4 months now for Patreon, for the channel. It's now making over $100 a month, which is wonderful because I keep buying gadgets for the channel and I keep looking out for new gadgets and stuff that I want to buy. In particular, I'm thinking about maybe buying another set of lights to try and really get good saturation on the table while I'm recording the games, but I'm not entirely sure if that's the right thing to do for the quality at this point. But having things like the Patreon make it easy to just write the check, or I guess swipe the card, and get these things in here and just trying to make the channel better. So I really can't thank everybody, the new people and the old people in particular, enough. Thank you so much for the support. I said that'd be brief, and that was not very brief. So let's now move into the other channel update, general update, which really is just kind of a short, crazy story about how my last month went. If you watched my last variety vlog, you would have heard me say that August is probably going to be kind of normal. I'm going to crank the wheel and try to get some videos out, but I'm going to be working a bunch. What I did not realize was at that very moment, as I was being recorded for that variety vlog, I was coming down with shingles, which would then also turn into meningitis, a terrible headache, put me in the hospital 3 days after I recorded that vlog, and it's been a crazy month ever since. I was in the hospital for 5 days. I was on medication for 3 weeks after that, having to dose myself 3 times a day. I've been on disability. I've barely worked for 5 weeks, and literally tomorrow I go back to work in a very big way, and I'm honestly looking forward to it. But man, I just find it almost amusing. I watched the vlog that I made last month again about a week ago and just laughed as I heard myself say that August was going to be boring. I just could not have been more farther away from the truth. I just got plunked out of my real life and thrown into this crazy medical whatever. I was always safe. I was never really in trouble, but it was interesting. It was not fun, and I'm looking forward to getting back to normal. I hope September is a bit more normal. Knock on wood somewhere. I will be working quite a bit, but I'll try to keep getting these videos out somewhat consistently. So yeah, I think that wraps that up. Let's move on. Let's now cover some questions and answers, and this month I have 4, which is more than I've ever done before, so I'm going to try and keep them somewhat brief so this doesn't go crazy long. The first one comes from Daniel Negil Akakovic. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I have no idea how to pronounce your last name, but your question was, will you be covering any older games slash well-known games in the future? And this is somewhat easy to answer. In general, at this point, I am not covering older games very often anymore. And the reason for that is because the first year or a year and a half that I covered the channel, I was doing a lot of reviews for games that I had been playing for years, old classics, like some of my standbys. The second video I ever did was for Cyclades. The first video I ever did was for Tuluva, which I'd owned for like 4 years at that point. So at this point, I am largely covering new games that are coming in. Some of them are review copies, playthrough copies, and some of them I'm actually buying. Lots of them I'm actually buying. But in general, I will be mostly covering these new games because I'm a cult of the new person. I really enjoy playing these new stuff, and I want to tell everybody about them because, well, some of them are good and some of them are bad, and I just like giving out my opinion. It's possible that I might review an older game here and there if I happen to play it again and feel like, yeah, I do have a good grasp on this. I do think I could do a review, but I would not expect to see too many of those in the future. Sorry. Question number 2 also comes from Daniel, and this one says, if you could support yourself from the Patreon backers and you could quit your job, what would you estimate your video output would be? This is a very interesting question. I kind of gonna step back from this a little bit and talk about how much time it takes to make these videos. For instance, this vlog right here, it's probably gonna take me about an hour and a half to record the video for this vlog, and then I'll be editing it for probably about 3 to 4 hours and then uploading it. So the vlogs are actually the easiest videos I have to make. Your average review video has about 2 to 2.5 hours of raw video, and then I have to edit that for another couple hours and get that out. So in general, those are like, you know, between 3.5 and 5 hours, depending on how much I end up talking and how hard a time I have with articulating what I say. And then the playthroughs, which I do love making, and I'm doing quite a few lately. In general, it takes 4 to 7 to 8 hours of raw video to record those, and it usually takes about 2/3 that amount of time to edit them. So my playthroughs could sometimes take 14 hours or so to put out. So if I was to quit my day job, you could maybe do the math here and say, oh yeah, he'd probably get like 4 videos out a week, maybe even 5. But honestly, it's very intensive. Recording these videos and doing that much editing, it can get pretty monotonous if I'm being honest, which is one of the reasons why I don't foresee myself quitting my day job anytime soon, and I'm not even sure if that is a dream that I would have, because I love board gaming. Playing board games is so much fun, and I would be actively concerned if reviewing and doing playthroughs for board games became my job, because it might start to not be as fun anymore if I was just constantly trying to meet deadlines. And I am trying to meet deadlines. Oftentimes I'm recording a video when I don't really want to because the Kickstarter will be coming out soon and I gotta have that done in time, or I just really want to get this out in time, and if I don't do it now, then I work for crazy for the next week or so. So even so, it already has some deadlines and some stress and some pressure, and because of all that, I don't see myself trying to do this full time. I mean, you never know what the future could hold, but also I need variety. I need to get out of the house and see cool new things, drive far away, listen to long podcasts, which my day job lets me do. It would be a humongous change to everything. I would honestly have a hard time keeping my mental state good if I quit the job. I mean, for instance, I've had pretty much the last 5 weeks off, and I'm going crazy. I cannot wait to get back to work. Part of that's because I was sick, but also partly because I've just been in this house so much, and I just need to be out there doing other things. I love board games, but it's not everything for me. So, long story short, I could probably get about 4 videos out a week if I was doing this full time, but I don't foresee that happening. So now let's go into question 3, which comes from Manea Katanau. I again apologize for brutalizing your last name. The question says, how many times do you estimate you have played games that you own and enjoy on average per game in the last 12 months? So this is definitely hard to pinpoint down because some games are quick and they get played a whole bunch, like Codenames did, for instance. Also games like maybe Junk Art and Skull. And then there are other games that take maybe 2 or 3 hours, and those don't see the table as often because it's just a big time commitment. I say probably on average, I get about 3 plays per game within a given 12-month period. Sometimes 4, but of course this is the way averages work. Games I really love, I oftentimes don't get to the table as often as I want because, again, the time commitment, or, I get ready to play and somebody around the table just vetoes it. They just really hate that game, and then it's hard to get that down. Versus some games, like I said, Codenames, man, pretty much nobody says no to that, so that game can see a whole bunch of play. So anyway, I hope that kind of answers your question. It's hard to pinpoint, but maybe 3. And now let's move into question 4, which also comes from Minea. And they said, if given the chance, would you have rather played even more great games with a lower average of play times or per game, or play less games but more often, delving deeper into the strategies and your enjoyment for those particular games? And I have to say, if I always had the opportunity to play the exact game that I wanted in that given moment, I would rather play less games and play them more often. But considering how often it can be to get, how difficult it can be to get those games out at times, and considering how much I just love new stuff, I'm definitely totally into the cult of the new. I just love seeing new ways that old mechanisms are smashed together. I'm a total sucker for new stuff. I think I have to go with the first one. I think playing a broader variety of new games, less times versus really delving deep, is the way I honestly have to answer, even though a big part of me in the back of my head wishes it was the secondary answer. So thanks Daniel and Minea for sending over those questions. If you would like me to answer some of your questions in next month's vlog, feel free to email them over to johngetsgames@gmail.com. All right, now let's jump into the excited about section, and this is where I'm going to ramble on about one game and tell you why it's currently making me excited. And for this month, that is going to be Feast for Odin. Now, I have not played this game. I don't have access to it at all at this point, so it's possible that I won't even enjoy it that much, but I am currently quite excited for this game, and one of the reasons for that is because I watched a really excellent playthrough of the game by Miwi out on YouTube. I highly recommend you give it a shot, and watching this playthrough really made me just want to play this game. So it's the newest Uwe Rosenberg game, which in general is not the biggest attractor for me. Like, I've enjoyed Uwe Rosenberg games in the past. I don't own very many of them, but one that I do own is Patchwork. And an interesting thing about Patchwork is that it was a spin-off from A Feast for Odin. So while the designer was making A Feast for Odin, he was doing this thing where he had all these Tetrisy pieces, you were filling them in on this board, and I guess he decided to just pull that out, make a quick little game called Patchwork, which has done very well and which I have very much enjoyed, while he continued to work on this medium to heavyweight, humongous table hog of a Euro game. So I'm excited to try playing those Patchwork-style gameplay mechanics in a larger Euro experience. The game itself is a worker placement game, which I am pretty impartial to. Like, I enjoy some, I dislike some others. But man, this game has a gigantic worker placement board with just a ton of options you can go to. There's like over 10 rows, I think, and a bunch of columns. And you also start with a whole bunch of workers, like I think maybe 6, something like that. But you are not putting one worker down each time, otherwise, man, this game would probably last forever. Instead, you sometimes put one worker down, but you at other times will put multiple workers, even up to like 4 workers down to activate a particularly potent action. So each worker seems to have an equal-ish power level of what you get for it, but for some things you're just going to plunk a whole bunch down and do a big action. It is a worker placement style game, so if somebody goes where you want to go, you can't go there. I guess that is a perk of having such a gigantic board, is that odds are good you're going to find another spot on that board that you can go to that's going to be probably pretty darn similar to the one you wanted to do, and even if all of those are taken, you're going to find something else good you could do out on that board. One kind of peculiar thing about some of the worker placement actions is you can go hunting for food, and when you do that, you roll a die to see if you are successful, which is definitely not the kind of mechanic you would expect to see in this style of large, medium to heavyweight Euro game. But it seems like right away that kind of halted me in my tracks. I was like, wait, what? That seems really weird. Like, I like dice in games, but that just seemed really out of place. But then I actually saw how this played through, and I realized that if you roll the dice and you don't do it correctly, you don't do it well enough, then you are not going to successfully go on the hunt, but you do get a consolation prize, which is almost as good as another action you probably could have taken out on the board. So it's almost like you are gambling to try and get a really good benefit, and if you miss, you still get an average-ish benefit for those workers. So that makes me feel a little bit better about that mechanic in general. I guess thematically it kind of makes sense. You go hunting, you're not necessarily going to successfully catch that animal. So that's kind of interesting. There's also ways to modify the die rolls to really trying to get yourself up there and successfully go on the hunt. So that seems interesting. I'm curious to see how that's going to play out. And when you have, again, so many different spots on that player board, you could probably just easily avoid those, do other things, do well in the game, and just never worry about rolling poorly if you're a person who has terrible die rolling luck or just really hates the idea of dice in these games. So let's talk a little bit more about the patchwork style thing that is going on in this game. For this game, you have this big player board, and you have to start down in the bottom corner, and you work your way out. And the more spaces that you cover, you are going to, first of all, reduce your negative victory points at the end of the game, very much like Patchwork. But also, you're going to increase the amount of income that you're going to be getting each turn, and you're going to be putting a wide variety of different colored tiles with many different shapes down on your board. And honestly, once I've seen photos of completed boards, it's really aesthetically pleasing. It just looks so satisfying to see all those different pieces all kind of snuggling up together and just filling all those spots on the board. You can also go out and find new islands and try to fill those in as well, not just your main player board. So that just seems like a super neat mechanic. I'm just looking forward to playing this game in general. Like, again, Uwe Rosenberg games don't really light me on fire with excitement, but this one in particular, I think part of it has to do with the theming of it. Not that I'm crazy about Viking-style stuff, but it seems like kind of a neat take on this theme. Like, you really are doing some kind of village building, trying to, you're hiring boats, you're trying to do actions better and better as you go on, you're trying to find the right pieces, you're turning things into new things that are going to give you victory points and fit snugly into your little player board. It seems like it's got a lot of very satisfying style things going on. I hope to have an opportunity to play it, and I really hope I enjoy it. I think there is a chance that it could be a miss for me, but at this point, I'm holding out hope. The next segment is Games of Note, and these are games that I played within the last month. For the most part, they are brand new games to me. Sometimes I'll talk about a game in here that I have played in the past, but I had a particularly great play of it. So as you can see, there are 9 of them. So again, feel free to skip forward to the game you're particularly interested in. And we are going to start off with Captain Sonar. So I played this game 4 times now, and I'm actually unbeaten. So at some point, I will lose, and for the moment, I'm really digging this game, so I guess you have to take that with a grain of salt. If I'd lost all 4 games, maybe I'd be enjoying it less, but I don't think that's the case, because what's going on here is you have 2 different teams of submarines. They are swimming around on the same larger ocean area, and the goal of the game is to sink the opposing team's submarine. You have to do 4 damage in order to sink them, and you're going to do that by laying mines and mostly just shooting torpedoes at them. The really interesting thing about this game, though, is that it is a real-time game. There's a divider going down the middle of the board, down the middle of the table, and each player has a specific role that they get to play, and they are quite different. So you are all submarines. So where you are is kind of hidden. Both teams at the beginning of the game arbitrarily decide a spot on the map. They're going to start there, and then everybody just starts. You move, it's all real time. The captain might say north, and then there's a first mate who gets to check off a power dial, and once a power dial is maxed out, then you can activate a special ability, which might make you go silent, so you can kind of scoot under the water a little bit so the opposing team doesn't know where you are. Or maybe you can activate a drone, and you can ask the team, are they in a certain sector, and they have to tell you. There is also an engineer who has to break part of the ship every single time you move at all, and whenever a part of the ship is broken, then you can't even activate that specific style of special action for the power-ups that you're working towards. And there's a little bit of a puzzle game with the engineer where once they damage a certain number of things in a certain pattern, they can erase all of them and kind of free things up so you can do stuff again. But then most importantly, one person plays the radio operator, and all they're doing is listening across the table to hear the directions that the opposing captain is doing. They are writing down the north, west, east, etc. down on a transparency, and then they are moving that transparency around the map, trying to deduce where that submarine could be, because the submarine is not allowed to swim through islands. So it really becomes this kind of puzzly game of deduction. You also have these special abilities like sonar and drones, which can help you figure out where everybody is. And once you have a pretty good idea, and as long as your weapon systems aren't damaged, and your torpedo is fully maxed out, and you're within 4 spaces, so there's all these things you have to get together at the same time, you can stop action, you put your fist up, you say stop, we're launching a torpedo at a specific spot, and then you see if you do damage. And then you just keep going. If your ship gets too damaged, you have to surface, and then everybody does a mini game where they're trying to draw a little line between a bunch of cracks on a player board while the other team is continuing to move. They know what sector you're in. They might have a pretty darn good idea of where you are, and so there's just this frantic nature of trying to fill in these little lines. Now, in general, I don't like real-time games in general. They just stress me out. There's too much going on, and I just lock down. But this game has been an exception for me because it's not crazy frantic as you're playing. It's kind of methodical. You're moving. You're trying to deduce where the opponents are. It does get pretty intense once a successful torpedo hit happens, because suddenly the opposing team knows where you are, and you have to run away, and your blood pressure can start to pump up. But once you might activate that silence, you scoot along, you don't tell the other team where you are, things kind of calm down a little bit again, and it, in general, is not a crazy stressful game. So I've mostly talked about how this game plays, but I will just say I've really enjoyed playing it. I've been the engineer, so I broke in the ship. I played the captain twice, and again, I've never lost. So both times I was the captain, I piloted the ship around correctly, and we sunk the opposing team, which just felt great. And one time I played the radio operator, and I did not do a very good job of it, but we still somehow pulled out a win on that one. I'm looking forward to playing this game more. It does play up to 8 players. I think I probably will never play it with less than 6. I did play a 6-player game, and it played pretty well. It's kind of rare to have a great 6 to 8 player game that is going to be not just a party experience, and so I'm quite happy to have a copy of this, and I'm looking forward to playing this one more. Next up, we have Cry Havoc, which I talked a little bit a couple vlogs ago about being somewhat excited to give this game a try, and I have now played it once against opponents and then once against myself. I have recorded a full playthrough, which is now live on my YouTube channel, so feel free to go check that out, and you can see how the game actually plays, and I'll teach it while I'm doing it. But what's going on here is there are 4 quite asymmetric races that you can play that are trying to dominate this planet. One of the 4 are natives trying to kind of push everybody away, but really what you're trying to do is just control as many regions as you can with as many crystals as you can in those regions. And once you play the 4 to 5 round game, whoever has the most points from those crystals in the regions they control is going to win. The real interesting part of this game comes, first of all, from the asymmetry, because everybody has a bit of deck building going on, so they all have their own unique deck, which is going to allow them to activate a whole bunch of the actions that you're doing on your turn. But also, each of these races has a set of unique buildings that can do various things. Like one of the races is all about research, and they just try to analyze these crystals, and they are really good at making new crystals with their buildings, and they almost don't want to go into combat as much. They kind of just hang out with their crystals and try and get a bunch of points, where there's another player which are just a bunch of sentient machines that try to kill all life, and all of their buildings are amazing at just killing things like crazy before combat even happens. So there's just a variety of really cool asymmetric buildings going on here, and I've enjoyed the plays of it that I have done so far. It has not necessarily blown me away, but I guess I'm not actually that surprised, because in general, area majority control, dudes on a map kind of games are not my jam. I play them sometimes, I enjoy them and appreciate them sometimes, but the real reason I was interested in this game was the deck building aspects, specifically the combat aspect, and seeing how all the asymmetries work together out on this player board. And it's been, like I said, it's been an enjoyable experience. It has not necessarily blown me away, but I was not built for it. And the people I've played with, they've enjoyed it to a certain extent, but man, that first game, it was a bit of a blowout. The science-y blue pilgrim player got way more points than everybody else, and it's kind of seemed like in that 3-player game, two people beat up on each other and the other person just ran ahead. And I think a big part of that's because we were new to the game and there's for sure things we could have done better as we're playing it. But that is always a bit of a concern with games where you can attack each other, that two people just hit each other a little bit too much and one person just kind of does their own thing, and because they're not being attacked enough, they kind of win. So I don't think that's necessarily why that game ended that way, but it's a concern. I have not played a 4-player game of it yet because I filmed a 3-player game. A 4-player game would have just taken a really long time, and I'm looking forward to trying a 4-player game to see how it better counteracts everybody. With the map is going to be a lot tighter. In the 3-player game, I've never seen the map actually get fully filled with everybody's pieces on all the regions. I think that will definitely happen in a 4-player game. So I'm looking forward to playing this one more. Yeah, it's been an okay experience so far. It's interesting. Asymmetries are neat. I want to see more from it. Speaking of asymmetry, let's now chat about Vast the Crystal Caverns. This is probably the most asymmetric game I've ever played, and what's going on here is everybody has their own role that they're playing, they have their own win condition, but they also have their own mechanics to themselves. Everybody's essentially playing a different game while playing it all at the same time. For instance, there is a player who plays the cave, who has a bit of a tile laying experience. They put tiles down, they control how the board evolves, because they're at the beginning of the game it's just one tile and it grows bigger and bigger, and they want the game to go as long as they can to the point where they placed all their tiles, and then they destroy the cave and they try to crumble all of these 5 pillars that are load supporting so the entire cave collapses before anybody else hits their win condition, and it kills everybody inside the cave, and then the cave player wins. That's pretty crazy. There is just a knight who's wandering around the dungeon, essentially doing a dungeon crawl. They're picking up items, they're gaining experience, they are getting better, leveling up, and they're just trying to kill a dragon. The dragon is really sleepy. They've been asleep for like hundreds of years, and they're trying to shake off their sloth by eating goblins, by smacking around. Let's see, how do they do it? Yeah, by eating goblins, by revealing parts of the cave and that kind of thing. And once they have woken up enough, then they burst through into the main cavern and they try to flee out of the place. And lastly, you have these goblins who, there are 3 different bands of them. They just swarm around the dungeon. They can move incredibly fast, and they just need to kill the knight. But every time they do a damage, they disappear. So they just kind of like swarm through and just disappear like a whole bunch of little needle attacks trying to kill the knight before they win. And it's just a fascinating experience. I played as the knight, and I lost. It was the dragon player who won, but everybody around the table was 1 turn away from winning, so it was surprisingly balanced. And in general, everybody around the table had a good time. The person who played the cave was not as enthusiastic about their role. They felt like their decisions didn't feel as important as everybody else's around the table. I'm very interested in playing the cave role next time I play the game to just see how it works, because it definitely is the weirdest of all of the roles, because the other ones have dudes on the map. They can kind of move around, they're trying to gain treasure, they're trying to do damage to the dragon or to the knight. But the cave player, they manipulate the cave. They can move tiles, they put things down. The more things out on the map, the more stuff they get to do things, but then everybody wants to get rid of those things. Those things are like crystals and treasure chests, that kind of thing. So it's a really peculiar game. It's honestly a bear to teach. You almost need to just give everybody their one rule sheet, say read the rules so you know how to play it, while I set everything up in the middle of the table. So teaching definitely takes a little bit of time, like more than I necessarily like. But at the end, it's such a unique experience. I'm looking forward to playing this one several more times. Honestly, I want to play this game at least 4 times. There's actually a 5th role that was a Kickstarter stretch goal. It's a thief who keeps dying and he's trying to pickpocket everybody in the dungeon. I'd like to try that at some point too. It's just a fascinating experience. I want to see how it all feels. Game number 4 is Il Vecchio. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this game is not really new. It came out a couple years ago. A good friend of mine backed it on Kickstarter, and none of us have ever played it until we finally got it to the table this last month. We played a 2-player game, and we both really liked it. Now, this is a very dry, boring-looking Euro game where you're in Italy and you're trying to become the big boss by having the most victory points. You've seen this 100 times. But the mechanics that were going on here were really great, and we both actively enjoyed it quite a bit. The base thing that you're doing in the game is you just take 1 action a turn, and then it's the next player's turn, which is my favorite kind of Euro game action structure. I hate it when it's like, here's 3 or 4 actions, and you do this, or you can do this, and you do this, into that. Turns can get so long. I just love the just do one thing, move on style gameplay, and this has that. And what you're doing is you're moving your people all around this map. It's covered in these roads, and there are these pieces on the map on specific sections of the map. And when you go to a spot that has one of these pieces, you can activate it and get a really nice bonus. There are several different ones, and you might just get some tokens that let you activate certain other cities where you can get a bunch of points and some area majority. or it might just get you money and that kind of thing. But a really neat thing is when you activate that city, that token picks up and moves clockwise around the table to the next available city of that type. So you're kind of kicking the can down the road, and it oftentimes felt like all of the people on the map were nowhere near those pieces because we kept activating them and they kind of run away from us. So you're constantly kind of chasing the pieces all around the board, which was just a neat looking mechanic. Now, the base currency of the game is money, and in order to do almost anything, you need money. You need money to move your people around the board, you need money to go into cities, you need money to do everything in this game. And a really cool thing that you are also doing in this game is engine building. And when we played this game, when you start the game, each player draws, I think, 3 engine building tiles. You choose one and then put the rest back into this big stack, and you can get at them more as you're playing the game. And these tiles can do things like when you do X action, do it twice, or when you do Y action, also do half of a Z action, that kind of thing. And my opponent, my friend Evan, he took this tile which let him get money every time he took these specific tokens which you need in order to get into cities. And it seemed like he was just always drowning in money. He never had money problems. He could always do pretty much anything he wanted to, move wherever he wanted to on the board because he got so much money from this engine building tile. Whereas mine, every time I reset my people on the board, I got to put a new person down on the board, which did not feel as good as my opponents. And I remember I was playing the game and I was doing okay, but man, I felt like I was just getting farther and farther behind. Evan was just he's just drowning in money, and I was just scrabbling so hard to get money here and there. It was very difficult. But what I ended up doing is I ended up grabbing more of those engine building cards than my opponent did, than Evan did. And at the end of the game, when all the dust settled and we counted up the majorities for our people that were in the different cities that we put down, I actually won the game by a reasonable amount. It was like 70 to 60 or that kind of score. And we both sat there and were like, that was fun. We really want to play this game again. It was just a really tight, neat experience. The mechanics all worked well together. I loved grabbing those engine building tiles, but also instead of grabbing those engine building tiles, you can take from a different stack which just has endgame victory point tiles, which you get points if you set up certain conditions out on the board. So it's going to dictate how you're going to play. I took a bunch of the engine building tiles, and I was the only one to take the endgame victory point tile, and yeah, it was just a really great experience. I'm a bit bummed that he owns it and not me, but whatever. He lives like 5 minutes away from me, and it's just such a neat game. I'm really looking forward to playing it again. It was great at 2 players, but I really want to play it with more. Next up, we have Food Chain Magnate, which is definitely a big, heavy style Euro game that also does not look amazing on the table. And honestly, what you're doing in this game is you are setting up a fast food restaurant. You might even make more of them, and you are trying to sell more food than your opponents. You're trying to sell them for better prices. You're undercutting prices all over the place. You are dictating the demands for the different customers. Do they want soda, or do they want beer? Do they want hamburgers or hot dogs? That kind of thing. And it's all wrapped around this very interesting action selection mechanism. But man, when you look at this game on the table, the map itself looks like an early prototype for a game. The art on the cards is nice. It's all black and white. That's good enough, but it's almost a bit embarrassing looking at it out on the table. But anyway, let's talk about the mechanics. What you're doing on your turn is you have a bunch of employees which will do things. They might let you make some, did I say hot dogs earlier? It's pizza and burgers. They might let you make pizza. They might let you go out and gather some drinks. You also might be able to get a marketing person who will put a billboard down on the board, or maybe even like a radio station, and it's going to affect all these houses that are out on the board, and they might, turn the radio on and be like, huh, I really want pizza right now because the radio is saying pizza's on sale. And what ends up happening is once everybody evaluates all of their people, their different employees, you go out to the board and see who buys what. The customers out on the board, they're going to buy, if they want pizza, they're going to buy the cheapest pizza they have available to them. But the farther away a restaurant is to their house, the more effectively expensive it is. So there's all sorts of price gouging that you could do versus your opponents. And there are actually some really big swings in the game. I played it 2 times now. The first was a two-player game. The second was a 3-player game. And I'm fascinated by the game. Both experiences were enjoyable. I like this 2-player game more than the 3. I think maybe because there was a bit of shine to it. Like, it was the first time I played it. In the 3-player game, I found it to be quite frustrating because I found myself behind, and there was just no way I could figure out how to get ahead again. I was maybe by the halfway point of the game, I looked at the board, I looked at the situation, I realized I had made mistakes. This is on me. It's not like I randomly fell into a bad position, but I was just getting farther and farther behind. And when the game ended, the winning player had almost 3 times as many points as I did, which is a humongous disparity when you think about it. And there were a couple moves there in the middle part of the game where I think I could have potentially done things differently that would have drastically swayed the game in a different way. And it's not that fun playing an hour and a half, the second half of a game. It was a good long game. Like the second half was about an hour and a half, just knowing that you were going to lose. And not just that you were fighting for second. Like it was obvious I was going to lose. I did terribly. It was on me, but that was not the funnest experience. I would like to try this game again. I think I want to play a 4-player game because it had one of those feelings where like two people were really competing, price gouging on each other, and then one person just kind of ran away with it. And by the time we realized how well that person was doing, there was nothing we could do about it. They had their marketing too well set up. They had too good of an engine, and they were just able to get the price down lower than us. And they were able to just sell all their stuff, and we would just be sitting there with all this food that would either spoil or I could actually refrigerate it because of the special thing that I had, but I wasn't getting points for it. I wasn't getting money for it. I will mention one last thing. This is a pretty neat aspect to the game. There's a bunch of milestones, and the first person to do a variety of things, there's like 15 of them or so, will get this special bonus that they have access to for the rest of the game. And some of them seem really great. Like one of them says, if you're the first person to train somebody, I think it was, then you don't have to pay the first 3 people on your payroll for the rest of the game. That saves you $15 a turn, and to give you some idea, I ended the game with like 130 bucks. I did not have that milestone, and I probably ended up paying like $50 or $60 throughout the game in money when both of my opponents had that perk. They were saving 15 money, which was 15 points on me every single turn, which felt like a very big deal, versus me, I had a refrigerator. I could make food and save it from turn to turn, whereas neither of my opponents did, but it really didn't seem like it mattered that much because they let their food spoil and then they made new food and it wasn't that big of a deal. So either way, the milestone mechanic was neat. There's an interesting game in here. There's also a frustrating game in here. I anticipate playing this one again, hoping for it to be 4 players. I am not sure if I will play it again after that 4-player game. At that point, I will have played 2, 3, and 4. I might be done with it at that moment, but yeah, it's a fascinating experience, just a bit of a tough one. And now let's shift completely to the opposite side of the board gaming spectrum and talk about Codenames Pictures. A friend of mine went to Gen Con and he was able to pick up a copy of this game. And if you are not familiar with Codenames, it is a party-style deduction game where everybody splits into 2 teams. There is a grid of clues in the middle of the table. In regular Codenames, it was just a word. In Codenames Pictures, they are these nice little illustrations. And what happens is one person is a spy master. They have a little cheat code thing that they and the other team's spy master are looking at, which tells them which of the clues on the board are theirs. And they are trying to tell clues to the rest of their team to get the team to guess the correct spots on the board. And Codenames Pictures is literally identical, rules-wise, mechanics-wise, to Codenames, the base game. The only difference is instead of trying to base clues off of words, you're basing clues off of pictures. And long story short, I really liked it. And I think I liked it more than base Codenames because, first of all, you don't have to worry about accidentally saying the word that matches one of the ones out on the board. Also, these illustrations are great. They all have at least 2 meanings going on with them. Whereas when you play with words, many words have one meaning. Like submarine is usually a submarine. There are other things that could have multiple definitions, but with the Codenames Pictures, every single picture can be at least 2 different things. Many of them have 3 things going on that you could really correlate down on, and I really enjoyed it. At this point, if I have access to Codenames Pictures, which I'm hoping to somewhat soon, I anticipate pretty much always playing it. I'm not going to get rid of the Codenames words. In fact, I'm hoping to fit it all into one box. I hope it fits. But I anticipate 90% of the time playing the Pictures version. It just seemed like the more refined way that this game should be played. For the most part, I've been saying positive things about my gaming experiences for this last month. It's been a really good month. I've had wonderful games that I've been playing. But now let's talk about the worst game that I played this month, and that would be 5 Tribes. This is the first and probably last time I'm going to play it. And if I'm being honest, I have been avoiding playing this game. It came out a couple years ago, and at first I was like very interested in this game. It looked really neat. You have this kind of Mancala style thing going. You have a bunch of dudes all over the board, and then the more I learned about it, the more I realized it was going to become an analysis paralysis nightmare. And also just, I knew that I was going to lock down and have a really hard time parsing what you're supposed to do. So what's going on at the beginning of the game is you have this big, you have all these tiles that are kind of organized into rows and columns. You have 3 different colored people on each of them. And on your turn, you pick up all the meeples from one of these tiles and you place them down one at a time around. And then you have to make sure that your last meeple matches the color of one that is on the spot that you end on. And then you're going to activate that color meeple on that spot. They could do things like just have area majority for how many of them you have at the end of the game. or they might allow you to purchase these genie cards, which give you ongoing bonuses throughout the game, or they might allow you to purchase these market cards, and the larger variety of these market cards you have at the end of the game will give you a whole bunch of victory points. There's all these different things you can do, and what it meant is it went just as I feared. Honestly, I sat there the very first turn, I looked at this board, my eyes went cross, and I just could not see. I could see a million options, and I could see 0 options. It wasn't like I was trying to find the best option. I was trying to find an option that didn't seem terrible. And as we played the game, oftentimes I just did the action that someone around the table suggested to me, because I just had such a hard time locking down, finding something good. The game felt so opaque. I felt like I suddenly didn't know how to read English anymore, and there's all these words everywhere, and I was just really frustrated. It's like part of my brain just got removed. Like, I'm a board gamer, I should be able to play this game, and it felt like I was almost a non-starter with playing this game. Like, I'm just that averse to this style of oversaturation of options and just analysis paralysis potential. And the game didn't end up actually taking that long. And the craziest thing is that I came in second by 1 point. I felt like I was kind of just flailing around as I was playing the game, doing suggestions that other people were doing. The 2 other opponents I was playing with seemed to be doing really great things. What you can do is, if you take the last people off of a tile, when you activate it, you can put a little camel down, and the tiles all have victory points on them, and you get those points at the end of the game. The game ended when one opponent put 8 of their camels down. I ended the game with 2 camels on the board, and somehow I ended the game with 132 points, and she won with 133. So it was just a weird experience that I did not enjoy as I was playing it. It felt odd that I did so well, even though I felt like I was not doing well. In general, I can kind of understand how some people would enjoy this if they have very fast minds and they can somehow map out the board and just see these options. But for me, it felt like really hard work that had pretty much no payoff, even though I ended up doing well. It was just a total miss for me. The second to last game I'll be covering is Crisis, and I played this on Tabletopia with a really good friend of mine, Efka, who runs the No Pun Included YouTube channel. He's a great guy, we get along really well. We played many games over Skype so far, and this one was a really great time. We played it 2 players, and we were both pretty darn impressed by it. In fact, I went out and immediately backed the Kickstarter, which was still running at that moment after playing the game, because I thought it was so fascinating. And there are 2 main reasons for that. The first reason is that while this is a standard worker placement style game where you put all your people down and then you evaluate them all in order, it has a surprising amount of engine building, way more than I can think of in any other worker placement style game. Because what you're doing, we are all in this country that is in an extreme economic crisis. Things are spiraling out of control, and there are all these companies that are just going bankrupt. And what you could do is you could buy these companies. They might be like a power plant or a farm or a leisure resort. You buy these places, you put them in front of you, and they become the pieces to an engine that you can try to activate. You're going to need workers to activate that building. You are going to need probably energy and maybe other resources. But then once you do that, this company is going to spew out victory points for you, and it's probably also going to get you other resources. And then you can use those resources to throw them into another company that you might have built, which will spew out more victory points and maybe other resources. And you can kind of chain these things around, and also you can export these resources out of the country, and you're going to get victory points for that. And the reason for that, from a thematic perspective, is that this country is doing so poorly that you need to do things that are good for yourself, like you need to get personal victory points, but you also need to make sure that the country itself stays afloat. And you can tell how the country is doing because there's this big meter going down the board that shows you the health of the country. And as you are doing things that are good for the country, like exporting goods and buying factories and then running those factories, you are going to be getting victory points, which will help the overall economy, the overall health of the country. But you might have to import workers or resources from other countries that are nearby in order to actually get your engine going. And when you do that, you actually start losing victory points, which is bad for the country. And the reason for that is because at the end of the round, everybody has a victory point goal that they need to get to. Like at the beginning of the game, I think for like a medium style game, you might start the game with 15 victory points. And at the end of the first round, you got to get to 20 victory points. And at the end of the round, you look to see how people did. If they made it to that point or beyond, then that's great. Sometimes they actually get a bonus for that. But for every person who didn't make it to that threshold, you count the number of victory points they were behind, and then the overall health of the country goes down. So there's this kind of semi-cooperative thing going on where people are, if you're winning really well, you might not want to completely destroy and block your opponents out from specific spots because you don't want the country to tank out and completely go bankrupt. Now, you might be in a position to still win if the country itself goes bankrupt, and the game can end early if the meter goes all the way down to the bottom. But it's not always going to be the case that you want that to happen. You might not be in the perfect position for it, or that one turn you might not have been able to get up to the threshold. So there's a bit of a camaraderie that starts happening where you almost try to point out good options for your opponents so that the overall game doesn't end before you want it to, because you're not in a position to win. And that is just super fascinating. It seemed like every single thing you do in this game is thematically connected to this economic crisis that's going on, and it also had this wonderfully satisfying engine building thing going on. Spoiler alert, the country died in like the 4th or 5th round. Like, we both went really selfish, we really worked on our engines, and the health just plummeted. I don't think either of us ever hit the threshold on any of our turns. We mathed it out and decided that I probably won. We didn't really play out the last turn because it was obvious that EFCA had zero chance. There was literally no way they could make enough victory points to stop the country from going out. And I potentially had a way of doing it, although he could have placed his workers to stop it. So either we both lost or one of us lost. Either way, it was a really satisfying gaming experience. It was fun to play it on Tabletopia, and I'm looking forward to getting the cardboard version because this is such a neat take on worker placement, engine building, and just a semi-cooperative board game in general. All right, we have finally reached the 9th and final game I'll be talking about specifically for playing this last month, and that is Junk Art. I bought a copy of this, and then I also played the copy that is over at Victory Point Cafe in Berkeley. And what's going on in this game is you are stacking these multicolored, various shaped wooden blocks in various different ways with a bunch of different rule sets. The game comes with, I think, about 13 different mini games essentially that have their own style of rules. And then what it suggests you do is you pick 3 of them and you play them in order. Whoever has the most points after you do all 3 of those is going to win the game. And from a mechanical perspective, this game is ridiculously simple. The base mechanics of the game are you have this tiny little pedestal usually in front of you, and you add pieces one at a time. You can move pieces by holding another piece, but you can't touch your structure. And that's pretty much it. And then you play these different mini games, and there's a huge variety. One of them was a real-time game that we played just last night where you needed to take these pieces and stack them, and you needed to put 10 pieces on your pedestal. If they fell off, that's fine. You just put them back on. Once somebody had all 10 pieces stable, they say stop, and then everybody will stop building their structures, and then you get points for how many pieces you have on your spot. But there was another one that we played where there was actually a central sculpture that we were building that everybody was adding to, and what you were trying to do was set it up so that it would fail for other people, and once one person had a certain number of pieces fall off, then they would lose and everybody else would get points. There were a couple of these speed ones. The craziest one that we played had us building our own little tower, adding 3 things, and then picking up all of our victory points, moving clockwise around the table to the next structure, and then building on that one. So it had this zany mechanic where you were trying to, the first couple things you put down were trying to solid, and the last one you almost wanted to set a trap so it would almost fall down. So when you moved, your opponent would come in and there'd be no way for them to actually build it, and it would fall down and you get points. It is a really fun experience. I've played the game twice. I've done 6 of the rule sets, and I've enjoyed every single one of them. I think this might become a standby filler style game that can play easily up to 6 players. It's just a really enjoyable experience stacking these things up. You have things fall over and everybody laughs and groans. There's just really good moments to be had all the way through this game. I was expecting to like it, which is why I spent a humongous amount of money on it. I think it was like $75 or something like that. But I bought it at MSRP at a local gaming store because I was finishing out my auction credit to get the game, but I have no regrets about having this game. I see this one hitting the table somewhat consistently for a very long time. We can now move into the final segment for this vlog, which is the shifting shelf. This is where I show you all of the new games that I acquired throughout this last month, and you can also see the games that I took off my shelf in order to make room. Now, you may notice that I got more games than I've taken off. Honestly, at this point, I probably should have taken a couple more on to fit them in here. I have some of these new games kind of stacked downstairs in my studio, but I got a reasonable crop of games. Several of these actually were review copies, specifically actually playthrough copies. A publisher sent them to me because they want me to do a playthrough for them, which is a pretty cool take because sometimes I feel guilty getting review copies of games because then I feel this burden, like I need to play the game enough times in a short time frame to actually get that video out to kind of, you know, quid pro quo getting that free copy of the game. But getting a playthrough allows me to do a playthrough, film a playthrough of a game that I might not have actually played with opponents before. I just kind of play with myself, figure out the mechanics, and then film a playthrough. So it gives me a lot more flexibility. But anyway, I'm going into a tangent at this point. There's some pretty cool stuff on there, and honestly, when I look at the list, I have played everything on here except Burano. So I have been very successful once again of getting my new games to the table, and I've enjoyed all of those so far. So yeah, looking at the games that I've taken off the shelf, honestly, the one that was hardest for me was Chaos in the Old World, and that's because this was like my 4th board game that I bought once I really got into board games, and I loved this game back in 2009, 2010. But these days, my tastes have shifted so far away from that style of game. In that game, you have asymmetric player powers, you have dudes on a map, and you are trying to control these regions. That sounds kind of similar to Cry Havoc when you think about it, and that was honestly part of the reason I was interested in trying Cry Havoc, because I knew in the past I have really enjoyed this style of gameplay when it's very asymmetric. But the problem with Chaos in the Old World is I haven't played it in many years. I've played it like 13, 14 times, and I almost feel like I should review it before I get rid of it, but it's been so long since I played it that I don't think I can speak genuinely to it, and I just don't see it hitting the table, unfortunately. It's got all sorts of zany things going on. It's got some gross art. It's a Warhammer type of environment with some really great art, but man, it's a bit horror-induced in many different aspects. It was a ton of fun for me, but I think it's now time for it to leave my collection. It's a very battered box. I don't know how much money I'm going to get for it, but yep. Anyway, I think that is pretty much all I want to say about the shifting shelf. Please ask me questions if you want to know about why I got rid of some of these other games or whatnot. Shoot it down in the comments below, and I'll definitely respond to it. And yeah, I think this wraps up the vlog. I don't have anything else to really say. I'm hoping that September is a good month where I work a bunch and I don't get sick. That would be really great. Yeah, here's to the next month, and I look forward to doing the next variety vlog when we get there. So I would love to thank everybody who has been supporting this channel through Patreon, including the 10 new people who joined in over this last month. It's really wonderful. I love how big this producer list is getting. At some point, I might even have to start scrolling it. I'm not sure, but I hope to have that problem at some point in the future. If you too would like to directly support this channel through Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/JohnGetsGames, and I super appreciate it. Also, if you've enjoyed this variety vlog and you'd like to see the next ones that I do this once a month, in addition to the full game playthroughs that I talked about and the in-depth reviews that I do, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.